Good evening. I'm Ian Wardropper, Director of the Frick Collection. I'm pleased to welcome you to a lecture by Edmond de Waal. As an artist, he's represented in an exhibition nearby at the Gagosian Gallery, which has graciously helped to sponsor this evening. As a writer, he's justly celebrated for an extraordinary family memoir, The Hare with Amber Eyes, which is at least in part about the passion of collecting and its thread through history. So it's appropriate that his lecture tonight comes under the auspices of our Center for the History of Collecting, and I invite its director, Inga Rees, to introduce him.
Thank you, Ian, and I'd like to add my words of welcome to all of you this evening, too, and my heartfelt thanks to Larry Gagosian and his remarkable team at Gagosian Gallery for sponsoring this event. We're extraordinarily grateful. And the more so because this is a first for us, a celebration of our Fellows Committee for the Center for the History of Collecting. And this committee is conceived as a vital source of support for all of the programming of our center, for the public symposia that we host, our oral histories, our fellowship programs, and the publications that we have already out and in the works. So we are exceptionally pleased that we can have this launch this evening for this committee. It gives us a chance, actually, to shine a spotlight on the center, which we don't usually do. It's usually all about what we do and not the center itself. But the fact that we have this little window to celebrate the successes of the past 7 years and the promise of the center's future is a very rewarding thing for us indeed. As you probably know, or many of you will know, the center is the youngest of the initiatives at the Frick Collection, and it consistently reaches out to people interested in art beyond the customary scope of the Frick Collection itself. So people interested in collecting ancient art, non-Western art, and contemporary art, such as one sees at Gagosian Gallery, are all participants in the activities of the center. I decided this morning that I would not indulge in the tedium of a biographical introduction of Edmond de Waal, because everyone in this room, I think, has read The Hare with Amber Eyes. And parenthetically, you should know that if you wish to have a signed copy of the book, these are available for purchase in our shop after the lecture during the reception. But for us, we felt that there really couldn't be a more perfect speaker than Edmond for this occasion, because his achievements and his interests speak so beautifully to the mission and the programming of the center. As a writer, he cares deeply about collecting in the past, and as an artist with his poetic installations that are now in museums all over Europe and the United States, he speaks to connoisseurs and collectors of our own time, as we also do in our oral history program. So Edmond really was a dream come true for us, and I can't thank him enough for agreeing to be the star of our evening today. So without further ado, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Edmond de Waal, who will talk about starting over collections and memory.
Thank you so much. I've never, ever had the words dream come true mentioned in my presence before. I feel like I could just walk straight out and walk home. It's a huge, huge pleasure to be here tonight to talk about memory and collecting, which are the poles of my life. How we think about memory within objects, how we collect memories, how we collect objects, how we bring them into the world and how we pass them on are real and powerful questions for me. And they are and have been powerful questions for me for a very, very substantial amount of time. And what I want to do tonight in the 45 minutes I've been told I have 45 minutes, otherwise I'll be turned off, is to try and tell you the story of how I got to this, which is a piece which is just over the road at the gallery called Black Field, through this, which is a small, complicated little ivory sculpture called a netsuke, of which I have more than you can possibly believe. Now, they aren't that big. They are actually this big, and I have 3 of them, which you can pass around from the Edmond collection, but I know I can trust you all. So as you pass them round, and then eventually in 45 minutes pass them back to me, you will realize that you can't have an object in your hand and pass it on without there being a synapse of energy, a moment of looking someone else in the eye, a start of a conversation, a shared bodily moment of one object passing to someone else. That can be an inheritance, but it can also mean turning from one person to another and sharing something which you then leave out in the world as an experience. But how do these objects work, and why are they in my life? They're in my life for a rather peculiar reason. I come in a complicated way from a rather bizarre Jewish dynastic family, the Ephrussi family that originated in the end of the 18th century in Odessa. And like good Jewish mercantile families, they decided to conquer the world and marry good Jewish girls. And so they sent their children off in the middle of the 19th century, like the Rothschilds, who they were desperate to emulate, to Paris and to Vienna. And the story of these objects, which I hope are still passing round, begins here in Paris in the 1850s, the 1860s, in the Rue Monceau. And the Rue Monceau, as you all know, being wonderful Frick people, is a beautiful hill of golden houses. But when you look at these houses, when you look at them closely, you find that one house after another is a statement about Jewish families coming from all over Europe and saying that they are not wandering Jews, they have come to be part of Parisian society. One house after another is a headquarters for a different family, a different dynasty. And this is where the Ephrussi family in the 1860s started their life. And if you look at those different floors of this Hôtel Ephrussi on the Rue Monceau, you find that all the family lived together. There were 3 sons. One, the oldest one, becomes the banker. They got things right there. The second son becomes a playboy, a man with nothing to do but have love affairs. And I have to say, one of the more bizarre moments of the last few years has been discovering how many Parisian cousins I've got as a consequence of this extremely good-looking forebear of mine. Really I felt very English when I discovered all this going on. And the third son, who lives at the very top of the 81 Rue Monceau, is a young man who loves art, Charles Ephrussi. And you have to imagine being 20 and being given your own apartment, an empty apartment in Paris, and a huge income. And what do? Well, you are a bohemian, well-off young man. You walk down the Rue Monceau with your new secretary, Jules Laforgue, and you hang out at the very best parties. There is Charles in his top hat with his best friends. Because what you do if you are a young man in Paris at this moment is you collect things. You collect things. He's born the same year as Frick. But what does Charles Ephrussi buy for this empty, beautiful, south-facing room in the Rue Monceau? He starts out by buying Medici embroideries. And he buys this bed, and he unpicks the M for Medici and puts E for Ephrussi. Because he can. And he buys this famous carpet of the golden winds, Savonnerie, which was made for the Louvre, and cuts it down to size to fit his apartment. There are moments on this journey where I have to say I feel desperately embarrassed. But what I tried to do in setting out on this dynamic journey to try and put these objects back into some kind of connection with the people who had known, handled, and loved them was to try and work out exactly what happened in every single space that these objects had been in, what kind of life they'd had, what kind of stories were interwoven with them. And what I discovered, of course, is that it is all about love. All about love. Charles falls in love. He falls in love with this fabulous countess, who I have to say also has 5 children, all by different partners, but there we go. And in a moment of wonderful 1870s Japonism, passion, the absolute intoxication with the new, with the fans, the lacquer, the screens, he buys, in order, I think, to show off this collection of objects. And he buys them and puts them in a vitrine in that room. And he puts them in a vitrine because the point about vitrines, the point about putting something just a little bit further away from your hands, is that you have to open it up. If you have a vitrine, you move towards it, you open it up, you pick something, and you pass it round. And that's what it's for. It's a kind of latent possibility of conversation. And in that room are all kinds of people, because amongst the things he's collecting are magazines. He buys the Gazette des Beaux-Arts. He's 25. And he starts writing for it. And he writes with passion, and soon his friends are not only artists. These are his pictures. This is in the National Gallery, and I take my children and let them weep gently in front of it. It is so beautiful. And this, and this, and this, which is in Chicago, and this, which is in the Met, and I would love back. But they're all about meeting people and bringing pictures and art and objects together. And so when he sees Manet's asparagus on the easel, and Manet says, it's 800 francs for you, and Charles sends over 1,000, what happens? But on Tuesday, back comes this for Charles, with a note pinned to the back of the canvas. This one has slipped from the bundle. And you know this story. You all know this story because, of course, it's embedded in Proust. Because one of the people who's going up that staircase in the Rue Monceau, amongst Laforgue, the poet, Degas, Manet, Renoir, is, of course, Proust, who's coming to look at pictures and get advice on how to write about art. And so my great journey into these objects gets thumped on the back of the head, because how on earth, how the hell am I going to write a book about memory and collecting with Marcel Proust on my back? It slows you down. But that idea of trying to connect places and people and stories and try and find not a simple narrative thread at all, but try and find that weight, that somatic weight, that bodily weight of what objects meant and who touched them, and see and feel whether there's a patina in objects, a kind of presence, a kind of pulse still within the objects, is what I really wanted to find. I thought in my innocence that this book would take 9 months. And by the time I'd read all the editions of the Gazette des Beaux-Arts and faced down all those dreadful, appalling people in the archives in the Louvre, I was already 4 years in. But where you find objects matters. And you find them in sales catalogues. This is an extraordinary clock, which is now in the Getty. And I'm afraid to say I made the terrible mistake, which I will never make again, of standing in the Getty and showing a picture of this and saying, I've come to take this home, which didn't go down terribly well. But this shows you Charles's evolving taste. This is the kind of thing that Frick would have collected. Because Charles is changing his taste, he's becoming more Parisian. He's buying this, and he is more in the public eye because this is the late century. This is the moment when this begins to happen, that extraordinary swell towards Dreyfus and the affair, the first chilling winds of anti-Semitism. That extraordinary feeling that actually you might be Parisian, you might have come from anywhere in Europe, but actually you may not belong in this golden city with its beautiful collections. And Charles, elderly now, buying late and very beautiful Monet, decides that actually this collection of objects, this collection of funny, erotic, tactile objects in this wonderful vitrine don't fit in his new Parisian life. So what does he do with this collection? He gives them away. He passes them, like you're passing the Netske, on as a wedding present to his favorite young cousin. And his favorite young cousin, my great-grandfather, is living in Vienna, the Viennese branch of the family. And they, being Viennese by adoption, have decided to go bling. This is their family house. And it really is that big. It takes up a lot of the skyline of Vienna. And that's the outside, but when you get in, it really gets complicated. Because actually, every single surface is marble. And the things that aren't marble are gilded. And the things that aren't gilded are painted by extraordinary late 19th century Ringstrasse artists. And the whole house of this extraordinary Viennese branch is full of 50 years of good shopping. It's full of Fabergé and French suites of furniture and extraordinary corridors of 19th century pictures. And in there somewhere are Frans Hals and Donatello. But why is it sent to this young, bookish man? It's sent to him because he has to get married in a hurry. His older brother, the man who had to take over the Viennese bank, had to become the next dynastic Baron Efrussi of the banking house, has eloped with their father's mistress. You have to think about that one. You also have to think that where the Palais Efrussi is, 400 yards away, is Freud. The older brother is disinherited, and Victor, this man who wants to become a scholar of the Byzantine Empire, has to marry and have children in a hurry, and so he marries the Baroness from the Palais next door. My great-grandmother, Emmy, who was much younger, not in love with him, and really had a passion for dressing up and also commissioning wonderful pictures of herself. And she, Emmy, this young bride, gets given, this is her in characteristic dressing up mode. This is in a new exhibition, actually, which is opening tomorrow at the National Gallery in London of Viennese portraits. And here she is. This is being Titian. I mean, why wouldn't you be Titian if you could be Titian? And there she is. She's got married and she gets given this great collection. And what does she do with it? Well, she is very busy being a social trapped Viennese woman. She has children. This is my grandmother Elizabeth on their carriage on the Orient Express. This is them at their country house. But what do they do with these Netske? They go into the dressing room, the small dressing room on the Ringstrasse, which is the only place where the children, my grandmother Elizabeth, my great-uncle Iggy, see their mother. She's always there getting dressed to go out somewhere else. But that's a place where these objects are handed round. That's a place where these objects connect to storytelling, because that's the place where books are read and objects become real. You pick up an object, you put it down, and you start to tell a story. And it can be a beggar, it can be the meddler, it can be the two chestnuts that I hope are still circulating in front of you. But that's where children and stories come together, and it's no longer a salon. It's no longer a posh, interesting, animating, charged Parisian salon anymore. It's actually a mother and children and storytelling. And what do you do in Vienna? Well, there you are, there's your family house. And like a good Jewish family, you have an awful lot of culture. This is the opera book I discovered for the family, and as you read it, you good New Yorkers, you'll see that you have brought your children up properly because you take them to the theater and the opera 5 times a month. That's what you do with your children. And that's what Elizabeth, my grandmother, bookish, very conscious that she didn't want to be trapped into another dynastic marriage, decides to become a writer. And she does. She crosses from one end of the Ringstrasse into the university. She writes poems and novels. She writes to Rilke, and Rilke writes back. And I have to say, I think that is unbelievably cool. And Elizabeth gets away. She leaves Vienna. And Iggy, my lovely great-uncle, solid Iggy, who has to take on the mantle of this ridiculous house, this bank, this empire, runs away. He's gay. He wants to be a fashion designer. He runs off to Paris and becomes, in his words to me, the worst fashion designer ever known. He really was the worst fashion designer ever known, but he runs away, he escapes. But then you know what happens. You know what happens, because this happens. And the point about this book, the point about writing this book, the point about spending these years of walking, just walking around cities, trying to retrace steps, trying to count the distances between a room, down a corridor, between an office, how long it takes to get to school in the morning, where every painting goes, where the light comes from, what it means to wake up and hear things outside you in the street, place after place after place, was because actually this moment of rupture, this moment at the Anschluss when this family, rich, but a family with this house full of collections, is held to scrutiny and held under the lens of a violence and a terror which is very, very difficult to comprehend and even more difficult, I think, to write about. As you know, at the Anschluss, there is this moment of metamorphosis, this moment of one city turning on itself, of the complete horror of people not just betraying their neighbors, but betraying the sense of any common humanity at all. That night that the first tanks come across the border, the house was breached, my great-grandmother Emmy was beaten up, was assaulted, and my great-grandfather Victor was made to scrub a street until the broom broke, and then he was made to scrub it with his hands. He was 78. And the moment of this erasure of the family, this taking apart of the collection, which begins the following days when every single object in that house is held up to scrutiny. Every part of that collection is anatomized. Everything is taken away. The pictures are listed by the Gestapo and sent to be looked at. The library that Victor had put together over 50 years of incunabula. His lost life as a scholar is put into packing cases and put on a lorry and disappears into the Ringstrasse. I think the loss of the library for the people of the book is the thing that I think is at the heart of this whole story. And what do you do? How do you write about this? They got away. Elizabeth, my grandmother, went back to Vienna and got them out to Czechoslovakia, to their family house where Emmy committed suicide, and where eventually my great-grandfather Victor, my grandparents and my father became refugees and end up in England, hence my accent. And after the war, Elizabeth goes back to Vienna and goes to a ruined city and a ruined house and an emptied house. And there, I don't know how many of you have read this book, but there is this moment of the handing on, which is something that you could not invent. It's the moment when, in this ruined place, my grandmother met their family maid, Anna, who, while the Gestapo had been taking everything of value from the house, everything that seemed to be of value in the house, had taken one by one the objects which held the story, the netscape, and hidden them in her mattress, and lain on the mattress throughout the war, and in 1945 gives them back to my grandmother, and gives them back, and that giving back is the handing on of storytelling in the most incredible way. And after the war, my great-uncle Iggy, who had fought with great bravery, comes to this suburban house in Tunbridge Wells, and for the English amongst you, that couldn't be more powerful as a place. It's the dullest place in Britain. And they look one evening at these netsuke, which are the only thing that connects them to their mother and to Paris and to this diaspora. And they say, what are we going to do? And Iggy says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take them home. This is a homeless man talking. And what he does is to go 6 months later to Japan. And he makes a house with his partner, Jiro, and he makes a vitrine in this house. And he puts out all these netsuke in this house in Tokyo. And what does he do? He has friends. And when the friends come round, he opens up the vitrine of netsuke and he hands them round. And they have another incarnation. And they have another meaning in this place where they came from. And they've come back to. And that's the place that I saw them. 17, I'd run away from school to go off and be a potter and go to the Lodestar, the place where pottery begins, which is Japan. And there, for the first time, with my great-uncle, I am given a whiskey sour for the first time, and I'm shown these netsuke. And the story begins. And when Iggy finally dies and is buried in this beautiful Buddhist grave, and I go to his funeral, and I'm asked to say a few words by the abbot of the temple. I say the Kaddish. And then afterwards, Jiro, his partner, and I go back to this beautiful apartment, and Jiro tells me that I am now the owner of the netsuke. What do you do with that story? And more complicatedly, perhaps, how do you write the bloody thing? Because, of course, it doesn't end. And so in desperation, I go to Odessa, the place where the family starts to invent itself. And I find the first place after the shtetl that the family invent themselves. And I find that this is the family house and the banking hall. And I go into this extraordinary, beautiful first golden palais of this family. And there's a Ukrainian man there who says, "It's cool you're here. We've just got rid of all the old shit. All this paneling's gone and all that old painting stuff, and now we've got air conditioning." So I stand in this evacuated family house and realize you can't get narrative closure. On objects, you can't end stories in some great triumphant chord because, of course, collections are metabolic. They metamorphize. They keep changing as they move. And what's more, you may publish a book and think that that's the end of it, but 3 months later, you have 1,000 letters from people who need to tell you stories about their own experience of what they inherited, what they were disinherited from, what they have, what they haven't got, the stories that are untidy for them, the fact that all they have is an accent, or they have a collection. And what do you do with that? Well, I'm a potter. I'm an artist. I make things. And I found that when the book comes out, that I stand in a gallery and find that I have made my first vitrine. And I look at it and realize, of course, looking at this first vitrine, which comes out the same month that this book, I had no idea I was making a vitrine. I just knew I had to do something. And it's called Word for Word, and of course, it's a page of the Torah, but more importantly, in addition, it's a way of thinking, which is what I do about how objects are disclosed, how objects can be hidden, how things can be put away, how attics work, how thresholds work. So when I get an invitation from the Victoria and Albert Museum to make an installation anywhere in the building, I say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a collection. And I'm going to put my collection of objects in the V&A somewhere where no one can see it. So when you go into the V&A and look up, 80 feet above you is a collection, a non-diasporic collection. It can't go anywhere. It also can't be dusted, but it's up there. And it's my take on the collections, because actually what collections do for me as an artist is to think about the interstices, the pauses, the spaces, the ways in which one object can be put next to another. And as soon as you put one object next to another and make a space, whether it's in a vitrine or whether or not you find a different way of finding the space, the air around objects. This is a project I did for Waddesdon, the crazy Rothschild Villa in Buckinghamshire, their calling card for English society. It's Frick-like in its extraordinariness, but I hid objects. I hid objects throughout the collection because I wanted to be there, present in dialogue, in conversation with these objects. But I also wanted to say that the point about objects is that they can be hidden. They can be more powerful if you can't own them all at the same time. And there are ways of doing this. There are ways of doing this through shadows. There are ways of doing this through putting things very far away from you. And there are also ways of doing it so that you move towards things and away from them. These are recent works where actually the opacity of the vitrine, the way in which things are held away from you, changes as you move closer or further away. You can move things through your hands and pass them on. you can have objects and installations which work dynamically within space, and you can be close to them or not. And so, and so, and so. It is a question of, in some ways, not allowing people to have things, but having them so that you can think of them, so that you can own them in your mind. You can have that extraordinary synapse of energy, which is through collections. And then, how do you bring it to this moment with us in the Frick? You think about this. Because when you see this painting, you may remember that the great protagonist in Proust, the painter Elstir, remembers as he's dying that there's one patch of gold, that golden wall, that fugitive moment where the light touched the wall. And Elstir, in his dying moment, says that's what it was for. It was for that moment, that fugitive moment, that moment which is about having loss, having the presence of loss, the space of loss in your mind, that actually makes art happen. That patch of gold, here present in a work I called Unpacking My Library, a homage to that wonderful essay by Walter Benjamin, is also present in the way in which I try and bring words and objects together. This is called the origins of silent reading. You read it with your lips, you read it with your eyes. It's there as sound and space. It is, of course, a kind of text, a kind of palimpsest. It's a kind of way of holding things together which can't necessarily all be tidied up, and that includes things that go wrong. When asked by the University of Cambridge for an extremely complicated and quarrelsome group of academics who asked me to make an installation for their new building, I decided to take this as my starting point. They wanted a grand work for a grand new building, so I gave them a series of vitrines of broken things and hidden things and taches of gold, which they had to walk across on their way in to disagree with each other. So this is my first work outside, and it's called A Local History. It's specific for that place, and when it snows, you can't see it, and when it's an overcast day in Cambridge, which is most days in Cambridge, it's very grey. But that doesn't matter. Wait and go back. And so, what do? What I try and do is to bring together the spaces around words, the spaces which are present in all those vessels I make, all those pots that I make day after day, sitting down at the wheel with my porcelain and trying to make one object after another and put them down in front of me, trying to make what I call a breath turn. This is the big work which is present in the gallery. It's by far the biggest thing I've ever done. It's called Breath Turn, and in each of these four works, you can see that it's music. You can feel, I hope, that it's temporal. Perhaps you can even hear the music I was listening to. But of course, it's pots on shelves, and of course, it's spaces and gaps. It's not complete. And what do? Well, this is my exhibition. And it all comes from the work of a poet who really matters to me, Paul Celan, the incredible poet born in Romania who writes with more power about the experience of language and loss than anyone I know. He writes in poems that move towards the fragment, He writes collections of poems that seem to move towards emptiness and silence. And he wrote in an extraordinary and powerful essay that the moment of poetry, the moment when the world stops and art begins, is Atemwende, a breath turn, the moment between breathing in and breathing out when the whole world is possible, when everything stops and everything begins. And when I read this essay years ago, I knew that one day I would dare to make a work called Atemwende. And I have, and it's here in America. And do you know what? It's kind of scary to be here in this place, which is a place where collections matter. But at the same time, I feel completely at home with you as an audience, because I think you, more than anyone, will understand that passing things on is the beginning of knowing about collections. Thank you.
First, we'll get back.
Thank you. I thank you so much. You know, my late father-in-law, who I loved, said the secret of any speech is to keep to time. He said, everyone loves you if you keep to time.
But will you stay for a few
Sorry,
questions?
yes. If
I
anyone
think the
has-
first question I have is, where are the knits, okay? So I'll come and get them.
They're at home. They're at home. They're in a vitrine at home.
I'll come
I
get them.
bought a vitrine, a decommissioned vitrine from the V&A, and it's in our sitting room at home. And you know what? There it is. Where else would it be? And a very, very fierce French art historian, there's nothing terrible more, a fierce French art historian said, they should be in a museum. And I said, well, you haven't read my bloody book. They're about people.
Exactly.
You take them out and talk to them and, feel them and tell stories about
Good evening, Aggie. Yes, I do. I mean, how can you not? I mean, for years, I used to actually walk around with one in my pocket. And the reason I did that was because it was about making it real. That writing the book was about touching something. And for me, writing is about making an object. So I did absolutely carry one around. And then about 2 years ago, a very red-faced Englishman accosted me in Piccadilly and said, what have you got in your pocket? What Netscape have you got in your pocket today? And I thought, actually, I've got to stop this. So I no longer carry them around with me. But I do take them out, and they do get handed around, and I love them. I mean, how can you not love them?
More questions?
Could you talk about what conflicts you might have about having this collection of Netsky where they're alive when you touch them, and then making works that, having seen them, I was desperate to touch them, but of course couldn't.
Yeah.
And also, there was a third thought that I think I've lost, but just about the touching and not touching and the frustration for those of us who would love to experience Netsky but can't
Yes.
ever because they're
Yeah.
in museums and untouchable.
Well, my take on that is that I put objects out into the world, and they do get touched. And I make things which are obviously made by me, and then I remove them. They are removed into the vitrines, and they become paused in the world through being behind glass or up high or held together. And that kind of removing of the hand, it's still there. I made the things, they're there, is absolutely about yearning. It's about yearning. It's about wanting something. It's about wanting to move towards something and having it, but not having enough of it. And that absolutely is such a powerful emotion. Having things which you have all around you all the time isn't necessarily the beginning and end of all experiences of touch. Not having something is a very, very powerful emotion.
Thank you. Is there a relationship between your wanting to conceal things and when you think of institutions, not this one, but when you think of institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art or Chicago Art Institute, where there is so much that's never seen by the public, it's always concealed, there's an overabundance of inventory. Is there some relationship there? It makes me very sad to think of all of the things that are never seen by the public.
Well, it's quite odd because, of course, I take a much longer view, which is that everything at some point is seen. So I don't feel that sort of melancholy about the hidden collections and archives, because on my travels, I find that they're still alive, they're just resting. You have to take a longer view, I think, which is that, it's this, like the previous woman said, lady said, it's not about having everything all at the same time. Is a huge abundance of things which are in the stores and in the archives, but go to those stores, dig in those archives, and you start to find things. And it's this great thing that you can't ever completely erase anything. It's still present somewhere. There's a pulse of it somewhere in the world, which is very, very interesting. So I don't feel that melancholy. But I'm quite glad to think of things just briefly being paused for 3 or 4 generations.
Maybe 2 more if there are 2 more.
I'm wondering if there is a connection in your mind between the experience and the awareness of the ravaging of your own heritage some 80 years ago, and the type of art you're creating with your hands today.
There's a very, very strong connection in the sense that I've been making things all my life. I mean, way before I started on this journey to investigate and research and write this book. But there has always been a synergy for me, a real synergy between writing and making. And the experience of going on that journey and finding this hidden inheritance, this for me, unknown territory that I went into, and the way in which I now can comprehend how I can put things into the world, back into the world, is very, very strong. My work is about collecting. It's about holding things together. It's also about the temporal, about how brief that moment is. I make things out of a very fragile material. I bring them together in these ways which are transient, and then I title them. I put a name out there over them, and I sort of bless them and put them out the door. What's going to happen? Where are they going to go? What's going to happen? But that moment of sort of letting go of them into the world in that way is something that I really care about. It's a kind of handing on.
Somehow I think that really is the perfect... Oh, do we have one more?
We have Rona.
When you create the song of space between your pots, is it very specific, or do you encourage the person you hand the vitrine onto to create their own song?
That's a good one. I don't encourage them anymore. I have two responses. These ones are very specific. They're very, very, very specific. This is how I want it to be. I really want this to be like that. And we record it and we do all that stuff. So that's how it is. It's very specific. It's one word after another and one gap, one space, one moment. It's fugal in that sense. But I did make a piece for an extremely argumentative couple, which was 2 lead-lined boxes, one for the top of the house and one for near their entrance. And I made a series of vessels, which then they move from the house, top of the house, to the bottom of the house, and they're in endless conversation or argument with each other, and they move these pots around. So that's possible too.
I think we should thank This is-
Is it infra dig to ask whether I can have my Netscape back, please?
And now, with great thanks to Edmund, I'd like to invite all of you to a reception outside in the garden court and perhaps continue your questions of him without quizzing him too much after that. Thank you so much, Edmund. What a brilliant lecture that was.